So for today's demonstration, you will need a mobile device. So we're going to get a chance to work a little bit with Poll Everywhere and see how the students see Poll Everywhere and how the students interact with Poll Everywhere. So a mobile device or a laptop computer, both of which are perfectly acceptable. So cell phone, etc. Your cell phone doesn't need to be a smartphone. It doesn't have to be a smart device. It can actually just be plain old text messaging. Okay? So I'm here to talk about applications of Poll Everywhere to active student-centered learning environments. Okay. So active learning, the difference between active learning and a lecture. The theory behind this is that in order to learn, students don't just listen. They have to do more than that. They have to engage in higher order thinking tasks, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. And there's been a lot of studies, not just this one, but this is probably the most cited to date. 2011, a physics class went from a typical lecture setting to an active engagement where students were engaging in discussion on complex topics, and their learning actually increased by 38%. So active learning environments really are where the students are learning the most in the shortest amount of time. Okay? So before we get started, I want to have a sort of a brief breakout session here to talk about active learning. And in particular, I want to talk about active learning in the context of a lecture-based class. So from your experience, what are the barriers for faculty using active learning and active engagement techniques in a lecture setting? So what I want you to do is talk to the person next to you about your experience and what are the barriers that you have encountered in using active engagement in a lecture-type setting. Let's discuss that amongst ourselves for the time being.
Figuring out how much time for the actual information, how much time for the active learning, and oftentimes you run out of time. But also, I've had the same problem as you. Students haven't read beforehand, or there's one student that has and they're answering all the questions, but I'm trying to get the other students, involved as well. So I have that problem as well.
Everyone does it through K-12, but no one does it.
Okay, so I hear a lot of really good discussions happening. So here's our first chance to take advantage of the Poll Everywhere software. So what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you send in the primary reason that faculty members do not use active engagement. What is the prime factor, in your opinion, about why faculty don't? So here is how Poll Everywhere works. There's two possible ways for students to respond. First, you have a unique identifier website that students can go on and respond using their laptops. Or if they're on their smartphones, they can even use their web browser to go to pollev/my site is RIT Biology because I teach biology. It is not case sensitive. The other alternative is to text message their responses in. And to text message a response in, you text this code to this number. So this code plus your answer to this number, and that will actually accept your poll response. Now, I don't know about you, but I cannot text that fast, but the students can. They can get out these big giant phrases in no time at all because they're whizzes with these smartphones. Okay. So this is how Poll Everywhere gives feedback during a lecture. Okay? And there's some features here that we can sort of pay attention to. First, you'll notice that the responses are appearing in order of time that they were submitted. And you'll also notice that they are anonymous. Okay? You can then go on to your account management and take a look at who sent in what. You as instructor have access to that, but it is not shown on the public slides. Okay? It doesn't say who's who on each of these answers. This is actually something that we can take advantage of, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. And there are other potential features that we can do here. It doesn't always have to be a list like this. The format and how the information pops up can be different depending on the settings that you choose. Okay? So taking a look at some of the things that you guys were saying, I heard time was definitely a big thing. Balance between active learning and delivery of information was another one that I heard very often while I was walking around listening. The amount of information that needs to be presented versus the amount of time they need to engage. Reluctance to interact, getting the students to actually want to discuss. A lot of times students will sometimes segregate themselves and not actually engage in the material. Okay? And again, time. Time seems to be the biggest thing. Okay.
Excuse me, can you again explain how the text works?
Sure.
We're trying it here, but we're struggling
Okay.
to get it to show up.
So this is the number you're going to text to, right? This is your to.
Oh, okay, I think I put them.
Then what you do is you put this number and your answer. And my students use both. I have some students who use the website and some students who use their text messaging. They have to register their cell phone number with Poll Everywhere, so that way it actually, you know who said what. Okay. So they have it. There's Poll Everywhere. There's pollev.com is where this is the site they go to answer the questions. They also have an account at polleverywhere.com that they log into, and they can take a look at all the answers they've ever submitted to any class that they're in. Okay, so they have an account management site as well, where they can monitor their account, they can take a look at the kinds of things they've sent in, they can see whether or not their device is operating correctly, etc. Okay? It is a free service for them. It depends on how you structure it. For my classes, my department pays for the Poll Everywhere subscription, which allows me to have unlimited number of students for about $300 a semester. So it's not terribly expensive. There is also the option of having your students pay $7 a semester for it. So if your department is not willing to get on board with giving you this software, you can also make it part of the students package, and they actually pay for it in their, you can be part of their book requirements, etc. I don't have any experience with having the students pay for it. I intentionally got my department to pay for it because I didn't want the students to have an additional burden. Okay, especially since there aren't a lot of faculty around campus who are currently using Poll Everywhere. If this was more universal, then I wouldn't feel so bad about having them have a subscription because it would apply to more than just my class. But as it stands right now, most students who are in my class, this is the only class they're using Poll Everywhere in. So that's why I pay for it for them. OK, so Poll Everywhere, no additional equipment needed. That's actually a big benefit. Clickers, not only do they need to purchase the clicker, which is about $35, but the faculty themselves have to carry around those transmitters, and they have to plug them in, etc. Because this is an internet-based software, it's all based on Wi-Fi signals. So as long as you've got a Wi-Fi signal in that room, you can use Poll Everywhere. Okay? All right, students use cell phones, laptops. Now, one of the other additional advantages here is that students can actually answer more than just multiple choice questions. It's not just A, B, C. They can actually answer open-ended, short answer questions. Okay? So as we were just seeing in this slide right here, they can answer in complete sentences. And that's going to be important for something I talk about a little bit later, the fact that they can answer in full thoughts. Okay? And in the polleverywhere.com software, you actually can get graded questions. You can do multiple choice questions. It doesn't all have to be short answer. And those multiple choice questions are graded for you if you provide Poll Everywhere with the correct answer, just like a clicker. And it also will give you detailed reports. So I can take a look. I can download each of my polls. I can see who responded at what time. And I can see what they said. That actually is pretty powerful as an assessment tool. So at the end of a semester, I can go back and look at every single poll I've given and every single student response to that poll. And I very often use that in my formative assessments of my classes.
How can you tell which student answered which sentence? Does it have like a tag or a number or something?
So here up on the screen, we cannot. But when we log into Poll Everywhere, I'll actually show you. If we log into Poll Everywhere here and go under polls, I've got my participants registered. Right? So all of my participants are registered. And under their registration, it has their email address, et cetera. But it also has their phone number registered. So on the first day of class, I make them register their cell phones if they're going to be using that. And then if I go through and take a look at all of my polls, I can do this Reports tab right here. And under the Reports tab, I can go and I can create a new report. And I can get survey results, executive summaries, and all of these things will provide an Excel table, and it will have the student name, it will have the poll in the column, and it will tell you the student's response to that poll. And I can have multiple polls on my Excel file. Okay? So it actually gives a lot of very good analytics.
Do they self-register or you have to register?
So what I do is I blanket register everybody with their email address and a generic password of biology. And then they go in and they change their registration around to be more them. They can change their password, they add their cell phone number, but I blanket register everybody, and then they go through and modify their registration. So before everything even starts. So before they even sit down on day one, they are on Poll Everywhere. And then I spend about 5 minutes on day one saying, OK, everyone break out your computers, log on to Poll Everywhere, change your password, add your cell phone number.
And what you just said, the $300 every semester, that's for each class?
So that is, well, I mean, that's for one instructor. So I can use this in as many classes as I want. I have unlimited numbers of students, so it's for one instructor. Okay, now there is options for institutionalization, which has been actually enacted at, when I first started using this, I was teaching at Cornell University, and that's where we started piloting this because they were interested in seeing how this worked. And they have been moving forward toward institutionalizing this over clickers. So there is things, there's a pathway for that, but here at RIT, we have not actually followed through on that quite yet. But let's take a look at some of the ways that this has actually been useful in my classes, right? So I want to talk a little bit about the ways that I use it, so the applications. So the first way that I use this is to encourage in-class discussions. So the reason I do in-class discussions is because it allows me, Poll Everywhere in particular compared to a clicker, clickers, since they're multiple choice, first of all, multiple choice questions have to be very well designed for active engagement. You really have to put a lot of thought into your multiple choice questions if you're going to have active engagement around a multiple choice question. And the reason why I choose not to use multiple choice questions is because it confines the student thought process. Whereas a short answer, looking at their whole sentence, I can diagnose their misconceptions better. And that's why I mentioned this idea of formative assessment and faculty feedback. While those students are submitting those responses and they are popping up on my screen, I can look for common misconceptions in that data in real time. And if there is something that I feel they don't have a significant understanding of that we need to move forward, I can stop and spend more time on it before I advance the class. So it allows me to formatively assess my students in real time rather than having to wait for a homework assignment or wait for, at the end of class, a worksheet. Okay? So let me show you a little bit what I mean here. Let me show you one of my students' polls that in particular has, this is an example I've used of this idea of formative assessment. Right? So let's take a look at the progression of the student responses. This is asking about sucralose, which is Splenda, and they're asking about how it gets absorbed by the body and why it's different than regular sugar. Right? So we have things like, it isn't a sugar anymore, question mark. They say some of them have the approximate correct answer. It contains chlorine, so it can't produce hydrogen bonds. But hydrogen bonds have nothing to do with it. They're right about the chlorine, but they're wrong about the mechanism. Some people have said this idea of condensation reactions, which is the correct response. So from this, I am able to see what proportion of my students have the correct understanding. That is that the chlorine being present, that molecule can't undergo condensation reactions. What percentage of the students have no clear understanding, which is when they say things like, is it a sugar, question mark? And what percentage of my students have a rudimentary understanding but not a complete understanding? I am then able to tailor the rest of my class, the rest of my discussion around that tentative formative assessment. And if the majority of my students are saying, well, hydrogen bonds, then I need to stop and I need to readdress that topic before I move forward.
Okay, so then right now, as the students are responding here and it's going, scrolling like this, how can you get a sense of the pattern?
So it's a lot of
How exactly?
it's a lot of cataloging. When I first started this, I would actually keep tallies, and I would attentively go over all of my tallies in order to make this kind of assessment on the fly.
Okay.
Right?
So you kind of are writing, on the whiteboard and looking at this at the same time?
Actually, I did it all on a pad and pencil as I walked around the room listening to students. So I kept it all on a personal. Instead of up on the board, I had a little notepad. It's part of the learning curve a little bit with software like this. It is coming at you pretty quickly, especially depending on the size of your class. So it's a part of the learning curve. When I first started using Poll Everywhere, I had to have a pen and paper with me so that I could sort of keep a scrolling title. But as I've used it more and more and more, I've sort of trained myself to pick things out and catalog it without needing that. So it's part of the learning curve, in my opinion.
So you're walking around with a pad. The students are
Discussing with each other. Yep. So these are all application-style questions that are applications of basic concepts. So for instance, we were just learning about sugars and condensation reactions. That's all we were talking about. But I've given them a more advanced version, and that application puts them into a state where they need to understand the basic concepts in order to understand how the situation works. And it lets me figure out which components of that complicated scenario they have a handle on and what components they don't.
Are they also seeing this?
They're seeing this as we go, yes. So some people say, well, why don't, some of them will just say, we'll look up at the board and answer the same thing everybody else does. But what I find that's not actually the case. Very often when I'm walking around, if everyone on the board is saying the same thing and a student does not get that, that is when they raise their hand and say, I don't understand how everybody else got that. So, if it's up on a screen like this where they can see it and it's slightly anonymous, that's when they feel comfortable saying these things. That's where I'm going to move on to my second bullet point here. My second application is facilitating communication between students and faculty. Okay? So what I do is at the very beginning of every class, I open a poll. And that poll is questions and comments. Again, these are anonymous. These students do not see who asks what. And this poll is running in the background at all times. So I can revisit this, and I can take a look at the kinds of questions that they're asking, and I can answer them in real time. But the students don't ever have to feel self-conscious or stupid about asking them, because no one is going to know who said what. Anonymizing the question asking process makes them feel more comfortable in asking. And the fact that I keep this poll running in the background at all times makes them feel like they can always ask a question. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so then how do the students keep track of the different polls, you know?
Okay, so
The polls here, and then if there's like a different kind of poll, how do they keep track of that?
So if they're using the website, only one poll is up on the website at a time. So if I went to the website right now, the questions slide, this one is going to be up on the website right now. And if I go up to the website right now, the questions one is still live because I haven't opened another poll. It is the most recent poll that was shown on the screen that is currently live, right? So I always sandwich them. So I show a question or a discussion, and then immediately after the discussion, I reopen the question slide so that the question slide is always the one that's active in the background. Okay?
I had a question as well.
Sure.
So do your slides, you know, relate to the software, or do you have to close like the software and then open your slides?
It
Is
is.
there a way to link them?
It's exactly what you're looking at right now. We're right in PowerPoint, and then I move right into a poll slide immediately. So it's integrated in with PowerPoint, especially if you, I'll show you actually what it looks like. When you download the software, at least on a PC, there's an additional tab called Poll Everywhere in which you can insert your polls directly into your PowerPoint presentations. When it comes to Macs, they have an additional widget that will do it, and that widget integrates with PowerPoint so that you don't have to close anything to open anything else up. It's all seamless. Okay, so one last application that I want to talk about that I've used in my large classes to actually some pretty great effect, and this actually is something that I happen to really enjoy watching the students do, and that is the idea of debate moderation. So you don't get more active than a debate, right? So I teach an introductory biology class, so the debate that I always have the students do with climate change. It's a very complicated topic that's got many different facets to it. And I managed to do a UN-style debate with these students using Poll Everywhere. And the way that that happened, it required scaffolding. It requires us to think about the assignment and how we're framing it to the students. So that way we get discussion on many levels, and that discussion is manageable by us in a classroom setting. Okay? So let me just show you a little bit of how I scaffolded things, and then I'm going to show you some of the actual video that I've taken of these students in the process of these debates. Okay? Okay, so how I scaffolded things. This is a UN-style debate, so there's multiple countries involved. There's US, there's China, there's Brazil, there's many, many different countries. Okay? Within each country, there are 3 categories of things that I want the students to be examining. That is health impacts, biodiversity impacts, and climate change mitigation strategies. These are 3 subcategories within each country. And I randomly assign students to one of these subcategories. So student A and B in the health impacts, students A and B in biodiversity, students A and B in climate change mitigation. They are instructed to research these things from the perspective of the country they are representing, not their own personal viewpoints. Okay? This statement that they make on their chosen thing, this is what I give them as a homework assignment. So these statements down here are produced as a homework assignment before any class has actually started. Okay? When we arrive in class, the first thing that they do in this debate is they discuss with people who had the same topic within the same country. So all the people from China who are talking about biodiversity, they caucus together. First, they have a small discussion between 3 or 4 students at first. And they come up with a statement that synthesizes all the research they did. Okay? And that happens in each of the 3 subcategories. There's a mini discussion between these people to create this statement, and these people to create this statement, and these people to create this statement. Okay? So now we have statements on these subcategories. But before this group of students can take their information to the international community, they need to now synthesize these 3 statements into one unified overall statement that represents that country's viewpoint on climate change. Okay? So this is homework. These 2 pieces are actually where the debate happens. So let me show you some interesting video here. Okay, well, that stopped working. Let's open with a different program. United States, Brazil, and the Maldives here at the center. And we've got Saudi Arabia and Canada over here on the right. All right. So make sure that you are logging in to Pull Everywhere. Okay. So if you're using your cell phone, make sure your cell phone is registered to Pull Everywhere. So this is just me telling them to log on, getting them ready. Then I show them this slide. This slide sets them up with talk to other members of the same country who had the same topic. So it sets up that miniature pre-discussion. And if we take a look at the students as they're engaged in this, here's just a little bit of an example of what the students look like when they're working. Right? We can see the level of engagement that these students are working in. Every single student is engaged in that conversation. And so if I scroll around here, I've got lots of examples of students being fully engaged here. Okay. Now what I do is after they've had a chance to discuss, I advance them to the next part by showing them this slide. They've created their mini statements. The biodiversity people have created their statement. The health people have created their statement. The climate change mitigation people have created their statement. Now I'm moving on to this, where I say, bring those 3 statements together to create an overarching statement that represents your entire nation. Okay? And let's take a look at what the students look like when they're engaging in this kind of conversation. So now those groups have come together into a slightly bigger group. And last but not least, now I bring them to back together. And now each of these countries has created a finalized statement that is more cohesive and represents all 3 of the subcategories. Let's see what this looks like when we actually want to do an actual debate. How do we facilitate real debate between multiple countries now? And how does Poll Everywhere play a role in that? Sorry, there's a lot of video here, so I have to remember where everything is. All right, so here's where now what we're doing is they've elected a representative. The floor is going to recognize the delegation from the United States of America. So each country is going to send one person up to deliver the statement that they've worked very hard to create. So again, while this is happening, send up your opinions. United States, go. So pay attention to what's happening in the background here. This is where the best information is really coming from. So this student is saying lots of interesting things about climate change, the United States, etc. But it starts out kind of funny, right? Kind of joking. But look what happens if we advance a little bit further. Look at the kinds of things that are up on that screen now. Disease is not an isolated incident to the US. American emissions are much higher than other countries. How will you help other countries if you haven't reduced your own emissions yet? Now they're getting into some more serious topics, right? It started out joking, funny, ha-ha, but now they're in serious engagement about the caveats of climate change on a geopolitical scale. So what I'm doing this entire time is I'm looking for things that I can use to spur debate. I'm the debate moderator here. So almost like a presidential debate, I am going to be the one who's posing additional questions. So I am monitoring what is going on that screen and looking for common threads. I'm looking for really good, insightful questions that I will then make the United States delegation, not just this individual, the entire group of students who were talking, address those particular concerns. So let's see if we can find that. Okay, so he's gone and sat down now, right? And US, your per capita. This is me asking the United States additional questions based on what has popped up on that screen. Care to comment, United States? Anyone in the United States? So I've asked the United States to comment on something that one of the people have said on the screen.
Americans eat too much, we drink too much, we eat too much, it's too much. I'm here to tell you that as an American, we want to keep our way of living high as possible because that's what the American dream is about. People come to us to see the standard of living. So we're here to help.
All right. So what we've seen sort of here now, we've seen multiple levels of active engagement. There was engagement on an individual level during that homework assignment. There was small group and increasingly large group discussions. And now what we've got is we've got people asking questions directly to the different delegations using the Poll Everywhere software, which would normally be very difficult to handle in a large lecture trying to call on all these people, etc. But by centralizing where these different responses and where these different comments are coming, it allows one moderator to operate on a large scale. Okay? What I did after this, actually, is I made them tell me who they would sign a treaty with and why, and negotiate treaties, and then groups from different delegations were moving to other places, and they had to actually negotiate treaties about climate change here, et cetera. But we can kind of see active engagement has really been happening on every single scale here. Okay? So let me give you something a little bit more quantitative, and this is something that we're working on publishing at the current moment. So before the debate, I asked them to send me in one word on Poll Everywhere about their personal opinion of climate change, one single word that represented their idea. And from those one words they sent in, I created this word cloud. The interesting thing about Poll Everywhere is they actually have a live word cloud function. So these word clouds can be created in situ, and you can watch them morph and change as students send in answers. It's actually pretty fascinating. So these are the kinds of words that the students were using to represent their personal opinion of climate change before any debate exercises had happened at all. We see very absolute terms: detrimental, destructive, damaging, problematic. Here is that same word cloud post-debate. Single word representing their ideas of climate change post-debate. Look at the usage of the words here. And the larger the word means it was more sent in, the more common it was. Complicated, interconnected, complex. Those are now the more common words being used by these students. So it's showing that the active engagement strategy is really starting to give them a greater appreciation of the complexity of a very big topic. Okay. So, and with that, I'd like to take any of your questions about Poll Everywhere or any of the things that we've talked about today. 40 students, I believe, is how many you get if you do the free version. So if you've got a relatively small class, then that works. But unfortunately, I'm a lecturer, so lecturers have multiple classes, and I usually end up with about 120 students in different classes over the course of a semester. So my intro class has 80 students, so I need a paid version. If you're teaching small classes, then you're fine. I don't think it resets. You might be able to remove those students from your, like, deregister them, and that would open it up, and then you can register an additional 40.
So, your experience with the software, is it intuitive, do you think, or is there a big learning curve? What would you say for the students?
For the students, I think there's almost no learning curve at all. For me, it wasn't a big learning curve because I've been familiar enough with technology, and it's been around the majority of my life, and certainly my entire college career. I've been working with things like PowerPoint, et cetera. The integration was not overly complicated. The one big learning curve that I came from this, that I had to deal with on this, was how to get the students to take advantage of it and its different applications in the classroom, but the actual functions weren't difficult to understand. That's intuitive.
Okay. I think that this is really phenomenal. In an ASL classroom, this would be amazing possibilities, but I know that sometimes there's students that would rather, they would jump at the opportunity to do English rather than using their sign language, which is hard. But maybe maybe not for every class, but every 2 weeks we could have something like this, and then the next week focus more on sign. But my question to you then is, do you use this for every class, or do you use it every once in a while for some classes, or?
So in my introductory class, I use it every week, like every single class period. Essentially what we're doing there is I'll talk about some basic concept, I'll set up those basic concepts, and then on these Poll Everywhere questions, I'm giving them something more applied and something where they have to take those basic components and build a scenario out of them to understand. And then from there, since their answers are in complete sentences, it helps me to assess where misconceptions are, and I can adjust my lecture material accordingly to make sure I'm spending enough time to get them through where they need to be before moving on. So yes, I do this every time. So it really does play into the formative assessment role, so I know where my students are at any given moment.
Okay, great. So then, sorry, just a follow-up. So then maybe you could pass out, it's kind of like a reading, passing out a reading that they can respond to. That might be.
Oh yeah, very often I'll give them, if I'm interested in making them do something that's got, biology is very visual. There's lots of figures and representations. So I will often either project something for their discussion and then open up the poll after they've had a chance to discuss. Or I will print out figures and give them to the students so that while they're discussing, they have those figures in front of them.
Okay.
Do you have a Mac? That shouldn't make a difference as long as both of the computers have the, like, you create the polls online, so you can create them from any computer. The computer that you present from should have the integrated PowerPoint thing. Yeah, so if you Yeah, so if you, I think what happens is the computer that you're presenting on does not have the integrated poll everywhere right into PowerPoint. That's something you have to download and install, and then that should clear up that, and it should work out perfectly smoothly.
I was just wondering, can you have like a split screen, like PowerPoint and then full, or is it pretty easy to maneuver back and forth?
So it's integrated right into PowerPoint, so let me show you. We're on a PowerPoint slide, and I'll show you exactly what's on my computer. This is just PowerPoint. If I hit next, it goes to a poll everywhere slide, fully integrated.
How easy or difficult is it to import ratings into my courses if I had a multiple choice question?
Mhm. So the way that I do it is I download it as an Excel file, and then from there it's done alphabetically, so the students are all alphabetized in the same order that they're on my courses, and then you just go down the line kind of thing. My courses doesn't allow copy and paste in big lists, so that's problematic, but it means they have to go cell by cell. But if you've got them all organized in the same way on your poll everywhere report as your my courses, it's just go line by line, enter in the grade, hit enter, enter the grade, and hit enter, and just go down the line. So it doesn't take too much time.
Which company or service would you say is the biggest competitor to Full Everywhere?
Let's see, Monocle. Top Hat Monocle has been sort of also pioneering the idea of bring your own device kinds of software.
In your opinion, why is this better?
So Top Hat has really worked hard to get the textbook companies with them. So a lot of times textbooks come with these things. This is independent of any textbook company, whereas Top Hat tends to really support. It really is gunning for the textbook market. Can I take any other questions before we go? Okay. Is there anything you'd like to know about Poll Everywhere that I can show you about Poll Everywhere while we're here, since I've got it all up?
Have you used this with graduate students?
No, actually. I only teach one graduate level class, and it's very, very small. So a lot of times we're just having these discussions in like real time kind of thing. So this, I find, is very useful for the larger the class is to initiate discussion. Small classes, it's not as difficult to initiate discussion, so I don't need it as much. So my graduate class is only 6 students.
Yeah, from your first introduction to it to the time you felt like that you did your first class using it,
Mhm.
how much time, let's say this weekend I say, oh, I think I want to do this next week. Do I have a prayer?
Yeah, actually you do, because when I originally started using this, as I was saying, I was a lecturer at Cornell University at the time. The administration approached me a week before the semester started and said, "You're using this. We want to see what happens because it was one of the larger. We had 400 students in that lecture hall, all at one time, and so they said, "You're using this. All the other classes are using clickers. We want you to pioneer this. We want you to see what will happen." And I had to learn it pretty quickly, and I didn't have a problem with it, actually.
What's the mindset change from I'm going to give a lecture to I have to incorporate this?
So the mindset change, I mean, that's kind of hard. The idea of, okay, I still have to cover a certain amount of material seems to be one of the things that faculty members have a difficult time getting over. Mhm.
This doesn't seem like it stop that.
It doesn't necessarily.
One of my thoughts, because it helps
Mhm.
get the questions you want to be asked anyway.
Mhm.
But to say, how do I rephrase this question?
Okay, so the reason, the mindset change that I found was going from multiple choice questions to short answer, as I explained earlier, the multiple choice being overly constraining and not giving enough information, at least to me, about where my students' understandings are, and I'm not able, from a multiple choice question, it's not as easy to diagnose the misconceptions that are involved unless you very, very carefully write your multiple choice questions. So moving to this idea of an applied scenario where that requires multiple components, and then seeing what components they have correct and what components they don't, I thought that was actually a little bit easier than having to write a full, very thought out multiple choice question. So that's where I started to see the transition towards the active learning. By doing discussions, it's essentially the same thing as asking a clicker question, but in a more powerful way that allows you to assess your students in real time. Instead of having to sit down and look at the data and say, okay, what don't they get? Why aren't they understanding this question? Why are they saying B when it's supposed to be A? That requires sitting down and really diagnosing that question and looking at the data. This allows me to do it much more quickly.
How easy or difficult would it be to choose a spontaneous question or slide? I could see the upfront having this, like, my slide is going to have the
So it's not terribly difficult to create a poll. So all you do right here, if you have Poll Everywhere open, there's just this little thing that create a poll right here, and you can throw together something pretty quickly. The other thing that you can do, as one of the individuals here was already mentioning, is that if you have the website open, you can show the poll on the website rather than in your PowerPoint. So when I, on the fly, want to create a poll, so say, I can hit create, and this poll will come up instantly up on the website and it will be live and they can start answering, right? So if I do something on the fly where I want to create a poll like that, I always have the website open so that I can close my PowerPoint, instantly go and create a poll and set it live right then and there. So it's not overly cumbersome, but it's not as seamless. It's always better to have your poll sort of thought out ahead of time.
Can you have more than one poll open, but, you know, I understand you'd only have one coming up with the display, but can you have multiple polls open concurrently?
So the thing that always happens when you're working in a PowerPoint file is that the most recent poll that you showed is the one that is live at any given point. If you want to switch polls, you just have to show that other poll. So typically what I do is, here for instance, let me go back to this here. What I'll do is something like this. I'll put a discussion poll where they're discussing and sending in like detailed responses. And then immediately afterward, I'll put the questions poll. So that way, as I move forward from here, the thing that's live is the questions poll, so that it is always running in the background. The only time the question poll is not running in the background is when they've got a discussion poll that they're actively answering. So I think I believe my email is in the invite to this. So if you have any questions about Poll Everywhere, please, by all means, drop me an email. I'll be happy to sit down with you and show you some of the interesting things that can be done in Poll Everywhere and some of the other interesting features of it. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.